When you're reporting a story, you always seem to sort of dive headfirst into it, to really embed yourself with people that are being affected by these things firsthand. Whether it was Iraq or Katrina, or talking to poor people on the campaign trail who these politicians are pretending to represent.
Right.
You seem to develop your story and your opinions from your interactions with these folks. Is that different than most people? I mean, are other reporters getting their information from like media handlers or?
Well, I think there's a long tradition in journalism of that kind of thing. I mean, I think this goes back. It's a very American thing. I mean, Ida Tarbell started it, 100 years ago, and there've been plenty of people like Terry Southern and that sort of stuff who believe that if you're going to write about a certain class of people, you should really, live in their shoes, or at least, try as much as you can to experience what they're experiencing before you write about them. I don't think that's, doing that is anything new, and unfortunately, I don't have as much opportunity to do that here in America as I did, for instance, when I worked in Russia, where I used to do things like, I'd work as a bricklayer in Siberia, or
right.
I worked in a monastery over there, or a zookeeper. It didn't matter, whatever. I just thought it was helpful in terms of trying to understand how policies affect people on a personal level, to actually live in their shoes a little bit. In America, we don't really, our press doesn't traditionally do that anymore, especially on, for instance, the campaign trail, where there's just no time and no opportunity to do it for the most part. I mean, where you're stuck in this bubble when you're following the candidates around, and you don't really have any chance to stay behind and actually talk to people and find out whether or not what the candidates are saying corresponds with reality or anything like that. And I think that's too bad. So I felt bad about it when I first tried to cover the campaign, and what I've tried to do is find a way to get around that and change the routine a little bit so that I can spend some time with ordinary people.
Yeah, I read that article when you were in Iowa and you drove back and forth between Butte and I forget what it was, Council Bluffs, and spent some time with the people. You bought them a case of beer and were hanging out.
Yeah,
I mean, that's to me that doesn't seem like it goes on anywhere else really in the media.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's some people who, obviously there's a tradition of that does get done. I mean, even at our own, Cameron Crowe, the guy who did
Singles, right?
Well, no, he did Almost Famous, and Jerry Maguire and all that stuff. I mean, he did Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is originally, he got an assignment to write about high school, and he decided. You better check this to make sure that I'm telling the truth. But from what I understand, he just decided to live in a high school for a month and a half and find out what high school kids really lived like. And there's plenty of journalists who do that kind of stuff. It's just that typically in political journalism, we just don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's too bad, because what happens with the campaign now, and this is what's really nefarious about it, is that we spend so much time. We spend this 2-year trip with all these candidates. We crisscross the country, and we spend all this time shooting them and listening to what they have to say. But in all of that, we never really see what is going on in America. We spend all this time traveling, and you never see poverty, you never see illegals, you never see what's going on with people who don't have health insurance or have been laid off. And it's amazingly myopic, to do that kind of journalism and spend that much time and expense and not see anything. So I think you have to make a conscious effort to try to get past that.
You're often associated with the concept of gonzo journalism. I mean, do you like that? I mean, what is gonzo journalism for people of my generation that kind of doesn't mean anything?
It's funny. I actually got hired once by a publisher to do an anthology of gonzo journalism. I was supposed to edit it. And in trying to do this subject, this was back 4 or 5 years ago, I remember I called Hunter Thompson, and I wasn't working for Rolling Stone back then, and I said, look, I've got this project. I think it's kind of lame, but I have to do this anthology of gonzo journalism. And he's like, man, that sucks. How much do you need the money? And I'm like, I need it pretty badly. And he goes, well, in that case, do it. But, I think it's pretty, Hunter's point was gonzo journalism doesn't mean anything. It just means that it just means Hunter Thompson is what it means,
Okay.
And Hunter, it's synonymous with one particular reporter who had this amazingly idiosyncratic style that everybody, people do try to replicate, but it's impossible to replicate, because even he couldn't at the end of his career.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's a bogus term, I think, and it does get applied to me all the time, but I think it's really gets thrown at any first-person journalist who makes a joke, basically, or who uses drugs or anything like that. But it doesn't have anything to do with me, really.
Okay.
I don't think.
Speaking like in that same vein of other writers and journalists, are there people in the media now, mainstream, who you admire or watch? I mean, where do you get your news from?
Well, I mean, Seymour Hersh, obviously. I mean, I really admire him. I actually had to interview him last year, and I was really nervous before I called him up because he's sort of a famously irascible character. I mean, you know, and when I called him up the first time, he did scream at me, you know, bloody murder, and you know, told me to fuck myself and all that stuff. But I eventually did meet with him, and he's you know, a great guy, and he, you know, however old he is, I mean, he's like 190 or something like that, but he still terrifies everybody in Washington. Yeah. You know, and he's one of the few reporters who does things old school. I mean, you know, he still combs the newsletters of all the various federal agencies to see who's retired this week, so that he can call them up and find out, you know, what secrets they have, and if there's anything that they want to tell him, you know, that sort of stuff. He's got a Rolodex like this, the size of this room, and that sort of thing. That's what journalists are supposed to do. And the sad thing is, there's only like 2 or 3 guys like that left in the country. I mean, you know, who really do it that way. I mean,
yourself.
I mean, Woodward still does do it, but he does it sort of the other way. I mean, his deal is, you know, I mean, I don't know him personally, but you know, from what I can gather, he's much more the guy who, you know, has lunch with a senator in a fancy club or that sort of thing. Whereas I think, you know, his sources tend to be high level people, whereas, you know, Hersh builds his sources with low level functionaries or mid-level guys, anonymous people, and I think that's the way you get the best stuff, because these people don't have a political.
They're executing this stuff.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And they don't have an agenda personally. I mean, or if they do, it's a much smaller agenda. You know. So, you know, it's great that he's still able to do that, and you know, I think he's somebody I really admire. You know.
Talking about sources, you seem to really have a lot of good insider type stories from Congress. Do you have like an informant somewhere in there, or I mean, are these stories there for the taking, and other media outlets just don't jump on them?
Well, Congress is an extremely gossipy place. You know, I mean, I think it's almost like a giant high school. You know, all these staffers, a lot of them have worked for multiple congressmen. I mean, there's sort of a lot of staffers are sort of staffers for life. I mean, they wanted to get involved with politics, and they moved from this guy to that guy, and so they all know each other. They trade a lot of stories, and a lot of them are very upset about the way things, you know, some of the things we talked about procedure and that sort of thing. Yeah. They're upset about it, and you know, there aren't that many journalists that they can talk to who are going to have the space or the opportunity to write about these arcane, you know, procedural issues. So, you know, I think when I came to Congress and I was able to spend some time there, it was nice, you know, for both sides. I think for me and for these people to be able to talk about this stuff. So yeah, I mean, I have a few people who call me every now and then. It's not a huge number, but but again, the reason that there aren't that many, you know, journalists who do that kind of stuff is just because they don't have the opportunity for the most part. I mean, if you cover Congress for the Associated Press, you have, you know, 650 words to cover everything that happened in Congress that day, and you know, you're not going to get 4,000 words to talk about what happened in the Rules Committee or the Judiciary Committee or something like that, or report on gossip. So, you know, there's just not a lot of opportunity for these people to talk.